When we talk about Black history, we have to get rid of the idea that it has to be all doom and gloom, or even that it has to be mostly doom and gloom. And I think the central line for it, for me, is the idea that the most interesting thing about us is what white people did to us. And I think many people would say, oh, yes, yes. And I would say, oh, no, no, especially not now, not in 2025.
Michelle Obama gave this speech recently that really annoyed the hell out of me, telling Princeton and Black people that the system is rigged. Don't believe the hype. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't feel like you're inferior if your test score is lower. I didn't test well when whatever. And, there's no substitute for getting an A in physics. There's no substitute for reading War and Peace. Whatever the thing is, there's no substitute for getting into that Schopenhauer philosophy thing. There's no substitute for measuring up. That's a challenge. It's not going to happen in a day, but it'll never happen if you don't face up to it. And if you let people pat you on the head and, cover for you, you're not equal. You can't really stand up and look them in the eye knowing that you haven't actually mastered whatever the game is that you're supposed to be playing.
If you don't approve of me never having to submit to really serious competition, if you think Black people actually need to be evaluated in the same way as everybody else, you're a racist. Talk about self-hating. You and me are self-hating. That's self-hating, that underestimation of what Blackness can be in 2025, as opposed to saying this in 1980.
Hello, everyone. This is Glenn Loury. I'm with John McWhorter. You are listening to and or watching The Glenn Show. John and I talk every other week here at The Glenn Show. He teaches at Columbia University, writes for the New York Times. I am soon to be emeritus professor of economics and the social sciences here at Brown University. The Glenn Show. So, hey, John, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I am busy. I'm on my way out to the University of Austin in Austin, Texas, to give a lecture and meet some people. I am dealing with the aftermath of my appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast, where I announced to the world that I'd broken relations with the Manhattan Institute, and that has generated some press. I've been interviewed.
I've noticed.
By this or that party. The Chronicles of Higher Education has a piece on me that was just out yesterday, for example.
Oh.
Yeah. Evan Goldstein and his colleague, whom I've talked with before at the Chronicles. I have a book that's coming out, a small book on self-censorship, which is not unrelated to the Manhattan Institute issue. And so I'm busy.
What has the media response been like in general? I must admit I haven't been able to follow it closely, but I'm interested.
Well, I think the main line is imposition of free speech being a thing on, impositions on free speech being a thing on the left, but then there's a counterpart to it on the right. And there are people are interested in me, Black conservative, and taking heterodox views on the racial questions is one thing. MI likes that. Taking heterodox views on the Gaza question is another. MI doesn't like it, and that's been especially from the relative left. But it's all good.
Yeah, it's better than being bored, if you ask me. Basically.
Yeah. I got to figure out what to do with myself, John.
Well, what did you mean by meet some people at University of Austin?
Well, I'm going to be talking with them and possibly exploring the possibilities of some kind of relationship that would be more than my being on an advisory board, which is what I'm serving on right now. It's all very much to be determined, and just exploring, do we have any commonalities of interest and vision that would suggest a more robust association than a mere advisory capacity, which is I'm serving on an academic advisory board to the chancellor and the president at UATX. There's a new president, Carlos Carvalho, who's an economist, a statistician, coming from the University of Texas, Austin's business school, moving over to UATX, with whom I've had involvement in the past, and I'll be speaking with him. And then there's Pano Canelos, who is the outgoing president, assuming the position of chancellor. He's a senior figure in academic administration, was president of St. John's College, the Great Books school, before he came to UATX. I'll be meeting with him. I'll be meeting some of the faculty and students, and checking out UATX.
Yeah, I was at Colgate the other day. I had the honor of getting an honorary degree from them.
How about that? I think
to a couple of people.
We should pause for a moment. John has been awarded an honorary.
Oh.
Is it a doctorate?
I think so. Yeah.
An honorary degree.
That's what the Latin says. Yeah.
From Colgate University, which is no small thing. Congratulations, John.
Thank you. I wasn't humble bragging on that one. It's that I was talking to a couple of people about, whether certain trends are going to take over the humanities and the social sciences for good, at a time when I have seen various indications that they are, and that things like the UATX project are actually going to be necessary. Do you see institutions like that as a wave of the future?
Well, I don't know how many institutions there are like that. It's a startup university. That's a pretty unique thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's a move. I think in the complex game of trying to shape the culture of higher education, some people are willing to explore new frontiers. I think this is a new frontier. They have a strategic plan, or perhaps I should say we, since I'm an advisor, have a strategic plan. There's classes of students have been enrolled. The bumps along the road that you encounter as you try to roll out something new are being encountered and overcome. There's funding and fundraising ongoing. I think it's got a real shot at being successful. Now, is that the wave of the future? It's hard to say.
And of course, there'll only ever be so many such academies, most likely. And I'm beginning to think it's a shame, because it's at the point where I don't know if we've discussed that. It's something that Steve Pinker talked to me about, half in jest, but he wasn't completely kidding, and I don't think he should have been, that universities are becoming STEM academies. That's where, things can only change so much. And that if you want to get a humanities education, or if you want to examine real social science, maybe they're just going to have to be different institutions. Maybe universities will not be able to serve in that function anymore, because what you'll get in a university is a sliver of what those things could be, which is concerned with social justice and equity. And it's just, there might have to be a whole different model of higher education as we move on.
What's wrong with a concern with social justice and so on, John?
Nothing at all. But
I agree about the STEM thing being different. I mean, that's graphically brought to attention by the fact that if, as is ongoing, the Trump administration cuts off funding because they're unhappy with the political tone of the university's curriculum, or the left-leaning attitudes of the faculty, they're cutting the main monies. They're cutting off of the monies that are going into the STEM disciplines, because those are the people submitting the multi-million-dollar grant proposals to the federal government. But the offending parties at the university are in the anthropology department, or the literature department, or the history department, whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And I don't know about in university governance how much voice the scientists have over whether or not the president gives a speech that has this character, or who the president is, or who's the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatnot, and whether or not they object to diversity, equity, inclusion, or they're just going along with the program because it's the path of least resistance, or whatever. But a university in which the sciences and the humanities and the social sciences don't talk to each other, That seems a grim prospect to me. I had thought, I can remember in my youth being influenced by an economic historian called Jonathan Hughes, whom I talk about in my memoirs, having the attitude that, we economists ought to talk to the philosophers, and we ought to talk to the anthropologists, and we ought to talk to the historians. We shouldn't be siloed. And I can remember in my own education that a lot of the techniques that we were using in statistical analysis and mathematical modeling in economics were influenced by developments in engineering and applied mathematics of physics and stuff like that. Paul Samuelson at MIT, who was a teacher of mine, was notorious for adopting some of those methods to investigate economic problems. I should think that a social scientist and historian and a student of literature would have something to say to one another that would be stimulating. And I would imagine the students who are mainly interested in one or the other of those areas would be poorly educated to the extent that they didn't get exposed to the best that is being written and thought in some of those other areas. So, I'm not sure what Steve Pinker has in mind, but that prospect is not one that I entirely would welcome.
Yeah, it's
We live in a turbulent time, and the media's increasingly partisan nature isn't making it easier to keep up with the news. We all need tools to cut through the noise, to spot bias, and to see the full picture. The tool I use for this is Ground News. It's the website and app I rely on daily to stay informed, cut through the noise, and get closer to the truth. Visit ground.news/Glenn Show to see for yourself how it works. My favorite feature of Ground News is the blind spot feed. It shows you stories that are disproportionately reported by either the left or the right, about 20 such stories every day. To show you what I mean, here is a story that is not being covered by the left. Trump aims to exceed first term's weapons sales to Taiwan, officials say. And here's a story that's ignored by the right. Humanitarian group pauses aid trucks bound for Gaza, citing Israeli restrictions. For both of these and for every story, Ground News gives you a breakdown of the sources covering it, the bias of the media outlets reporting across the left, center, and right, how reliable these sources have been in the past, and who owns them. This is the kind of news analysis you won't find anywhere else. Right now, my viewers can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, which is the same plan I use. Make sure you subscribe using my link at ground.news/Glenn Show. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code when signing up. That's ground.news/Glenn Show.
It's a cloudy day and I've got a long one ahead of me, and so it may be partly just my mood, but I just worry that a whole new generation of people is coming in those departments that really won't be interested in anything except how their fields relate to social justice, with which there is nothing wrong, but it's about 1/10 of what makes anything interesting. And if all you really care about is power relations, then frankly, who cares about physics? Or my favorite aspect of this is, what's his name? Philip Ewell is a Black musicologist who has made a lot of noise since, I'll let you guess what year, with a theory that music theory is racist. And the reason that it's racist is because, and it gets into some real technicalities that I don't fully understand. I've been tutored in it by a couple of musicologists, but basically there's a foreground and there's a background in music. And if you're dealing with the idea of something that's in the background that comes to be in the foreground, et cetera, that those two things, he analogizes that to racist discrimination and power hierarchies. And therefore, because of that, and the fact that the leading practitioner of classic music theory was, a German guy living in the late 1800s. How do you think he may have felt about the hierarchy of the races? But it had nothing to do with his music theory. So music theory is racist. And so that's the sort of thing that I see, that a musicologist would
But it's
only
not
be...
all of musicology, is it? I mean, the DEI approach to musicology is not all of musicology, is it?
Let's try this. That person got around in practically, every major university and still is, just like Ibram Kendi, starting in 2020. He was roundly celebrated. People who he runs in with get roasted on social media, or at least they used to be. And I'm trying not to go too close to the fire because I'm talking about people who I really like and I understand the position that they're in. But it's partly because of ideas like his that the syllabus of the music history course that I love teaching has been turned upside down in ways that I can't help thinking the older cohort don't really, would rather not do, but I know that this is coming from the younger cohort. The younger cohort are going to be gray-haired faculty in another generation. So it's that kind of thing. I don't see how this stops. And I'm not sure.
You don't think it's stopping? I mean,
Wokeness,
we live in a completely different world, don't we?
killing
Now,
careers,
5 years
yes.
ago?
Killing careers, yes. But no more Wagner and Nina Simone instead. That's still with us. And somebody's going to say, what's wrong with Nina Simone? Nothing at all. But are you teaching Nina Simone in the same course as you're teaching fucking Schoenberg? No. And so that's what I mean. I'm not going to talk about that anymore.
Well, that's not what they're doing at UATX, that's for sure.
I know. So,
I ran into Clifton, the actor that we had on the show.
Clifton Duncan, yes. Yeah.
Clifton Duncan?
Yeah.
I ran into him at a conference at AEI, American Enterprise Institute, that Ian Rowe, the charter school entrepreneur and student of racial politics and policy, organized. And he came, Clifton did, as an attendee, just as somebody sitting in the audience. He wasn't a part of the program. But I was reminded of that conversation that we had with him, which was very interesting in the spirit of what you're complaining about right now.
Yeah, there are things that have really just settled in. I think glass half empty, glass half full. I think there is a victory in that there were things going on in 2020 and 2021 that I think there was an intelligent, sustained pushback against it, where I think most people managed not to end up recapitulating the mistakes of the enemy. And I think that it's at the point where the kind of person who was pretending to go along with defenestrations in 2020 now is comfortable saying that there was something wrong with that and that people shouldn't be treated that way. I feel like I was part of something. And that's good.
What role do you think inquiry about social justice and power should play in the areas of study that we're talking about here in history, in the social sciences? Even in linguistics, is there any, and I don't have a position on that question, legitimacy to raising questions that are political in the best sense of that word?
It's one part of things. And I think that it's something that should come up much more than it would have, say, 50 years ago in any of these fields. It's advanced to think about who's speaking, who has the power, who's being exploited. These are things that, the tweedy, cigarette smoking, white guy professor, I was taught by the last generation of them. They had no blessed idea or interest in those things. And it's good that we do. But the idea that that is the most interesting thing is dangerous because, one, it isn't. And two, it's suspiciously easy. If what you're looking for is he has power over her, this is about race, this is about class, it's easy. It's playing with blocks as opposed to really doing analysis. When I saw that sort of thing coming in the 80s and 90s when I was a grad student, my first thought was yes. It was first introduced to me as something called cultural studies with a capital CS. And I thought, yes. But for example, if you're going to look at the musical My Fair Lady and your first question is who's talking? And of course, it becomes about the oppression of Eliza Doolittle, even though supposedly she's being elevated by being taught to speak well. Sure, that's one perspective. But if that's what you find most interesting about that play, about that score, about that story, you're missing most of it. And I'm not sure that I call that education. That's the problem, putting it front and center.
George Bernard Shaw, Pygmalion. What is the most interesting theme in that piece of literature, in your opinion?
Frankly, if I were just going to go at it as a modern person, I would say that all of the issues, and this is partly me, all of the issues about language are very subtle in terms of, first of all, what he was doing with the way he was recording sounds and what that
The
was
rain in
actually
Spain falls mainly into
on
plain.
Ryan and Spain, and the whole idea of what he's trying to do for her. Now, you want to be modern about it? Everybody often says, like often people say to me, big surprise, I could play Henry Higgins. Look, I now am that man. But if you were going to make it
That's
into,
not a compliment, Jack.
I know that's the next thing. But if it was a black story, like if it's not me playing a white guy, but it's me, bringing Shaniqua up from the streets and teaching her to talk like me, the story is absolutely revolting. Why is it that anybody found that cute in Pygmalion? You can talk about that. But then there's also, what is the issue of class and her father
That's
and
it.
the points that he's trying to make? Is he convincing, or is he just kind of chummy and cute? And I mean in the play, not the musical. And then with the musical, frankly, it's very sophisticated scoring. It's very hard to play on the piano if you have the actual music. And I just think for somebody to take all of that in and think he's not nice to her, that's just one part of it. And we knew he wasn't nice to her, and we've kind of been through it. And so it's just that the social justice, unless you're talking about, unless your class is about social justice, called that, it shouldn't be front and center. And yes, it's happening in linguistics. There are people who are making whole careers where what they do is they identify how language is used to abuse people, how language is used to oppress people, calling linguistics racist in ways that are extremely labored, and not just in being angry at the idea that you have to do more math nowadays, but just the general idea that white people go in and document the languages of brown people, and it's not the brown people who are in control, but never mind that the brown people, because they're poor and isolated, wouldn't be able to do it themselves, and if they didn't do it, the language might disappear. All of that.
What
As
I don't
opposed,
understand
I'm just
is
going to say quickly, as opposed to, and all those things are fine, but actual linguistics requires harder thought than all of that. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, if it's the whole show, clearly that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no attention to the concerns of the identity mongers, how does the world look from the bottom up as opposed to from the top down? What about the voice of the people who are voiceless and all that? There's no attention to that. It seems like something important would be missing as well.
Definitely.
So it, and I wonder how one contains the reflexive rejection of the identity monger, contains that so that you don't, as it were, completely turn one's back on that set of issues. I'm trying to think of a concrete example. So Khalil Gibran Muhammad is a historian. He has a book early, and I think came out of his dissertation. It's a great book called The Condemnation of Blackness, and it's a history of race, crime, and punishment from 1890 to 1930. And he's interested in contrasting the reaction of the intellectual, political, and law enforcement communities to the law-breaking behavior as it manifested itself in the Black populations migrating into urban America into the 19th century out of the rural South, and the European immigrant populations migrating into those same cities from South and Eastern Europe in the late decades of the 19th and the first decades of the 20th century. And basically, it's a kind of racial stigma argument. It's that the powers that be, both in the academy and in the press and in administrative practice, thought the Blacks were unfit for civilization, that they were intrinsically criminal. Whereas the basic reaction to the plight of the poor tenement dwelling, garment district working, Italian and Irish and Jewish and Polish was a settlement house. It was reform. It was these people are remediable. They can be brought within the orbit of our civilization without too much difficulty. Condemnation of Blackness. Now, That's Exhibit A in your indictment, isn't it, of a kind of fixation on, and I just give this as one example, and could give many examples of this concern. Exhibit A, and yet I think that if the young Khalil Muhammad, who wrote that book, went on to become head of the Schomburg Library in New York City for a while before he went to an academic job at Harvard. He was trained by David Levering Lewis, the great biographer and historian at Rutgers. You know, that, I mean, I can't imagine what the world would look like if I didn't have voices like that. Not to go on too long about this, but just to say, you don't want to extirpate those voices in a reaction against Ibram X. Kendi.
No, you don't. And I mean, the work that you just described absolutely must be done. It would have been done by many fewer people 100 years ago.
Right.
What worries me is if too many people are doing that kind of work, and or as if that kind of work is seen as the heart of the discipline. I think of something where enough time has passed that I'm going to tell it. And I hope these people don't recognize themselves, but it's a very useful story. I was giving a talk somewhere a long time ago now. And there was a person who I was seated at dinner, and there was a person next to me who was finishing their dissertation. And it was about how in the 1800s in a particular city, there were people with a certain disability that I'm not going to specify, just leave it there. But this disability, which we're all familiar with it, it turned out that in this city, Black people with that disability weren't treated as well as white people with that disability. And the person went on at great length with the evidence for this. And frankly, who would have thought otherwise? And there wasn't any particular reason we needed to know this instance. Now, academia is about putting bricks in the wall. I've got academic books I've written where some people would say, well, why did you need to study that at all? But in this case, certainly it was what I was thinking about this. In contrast to, there was a Black person sitting at the other end of the table, and they were enthusiastically talking about an operetta composer, very, very white, from the turn of the 20th century, named Victor Herbert. He wrote Babes in Toyland and, songs that are now antique. Most of us might know Toyland, Toyland, but that's about all. But he was like the Andrew Lloyd Webber of his day. And he did great work. And as you can imagine, it's kind of one of my things because I like that sort of thing. And here he is talking about it. And he's so interested in it. And it's the only other Black person I've known who gives a damn about Victor Herbert. And I found myself caught in a situation which I probably shouldn't have been, but I saw myself as kind of a pair of eyes and kind of an example of what we're supposed to pay attention to. This other person went on and on and on about this very predictable instance of discrimination where nobody would have thought otherwise. And it was boring. It was dull. But I felt like I could not leave that person or kind of gently tilt my body and go engage the other person about Victor Herbert because I would have been seen as insensitive. I'm supposed to be more interested in the injustice than the fruity music of some probably racist person 125 years ago. I didn't like that. I kind of thought a person like this first one should be encouraged to study maybe something else and maybe not about injustice, maybe about something good, something interesting that Black people did in that city in 1858, as opposed to what they were describing. Or maybe that person should have been taught to go study Victor Herbert. It's just, there's too much of the first person. That's my problem.
So I was impressed by the piece you had in the magazine.
Notice that transition I did? Yeah.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Did you notice the transition I just did to that?
Oh, you've egged me into it. Okay, well, great piece. Congratulations. New York Times Sunday Magazine major feature on the Black Smithsonian on the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote that. And
how did it come about? Were you commissioned to go to the museum and then write about it?
No, actually, I had never been. I was always walking by.
I have yet to go.
Yeah, it's often not the first thing you think of, but I thought it's time. And so I happened to be down there for another reason for 10 seconds. And I thought, during that free afternoon, instead of reading in my hotel room, I'm going to go run down to the mall and see it. And then I just kind of thought, because if you have to crank out something every week, you're always thinking, I thought, I should write about what it's like, because I got the feeling I was going to like it. Like I didn't go in, hate tweeting it or something like that. I thought, I'll bet they did a great job. And so I went in. It's a strenuous museum, even physically. You have to walk up a hill, but there's a point to the hill. You have to walk up the hill because you're joining in the struggle and you come up into the light of the first floor. It's a really good job. And I just thought, this is good. So I wrote a quick piece, like 1,000. And then it was actually Patrick Healy, who until recently was the top editor of the opinion page. Of the editorial page. And he is the one who suggested that I flesh it out. And I would not have thought of that myself. But, it's good to be able to write long sometimes. And you have certainly experienced that you have less and less space these days. I call it the tail end of like when the New Republic would let me write 8,000. I understand that doesn't work nowadays, but it was good to be able to stretch out. And so I did it. And I've had good response from it. It seems to have touched people in a way that I was not necessarily going for, but I believed what I wrote.
What did you write? I mean, in a nutshell.
I just wrote that when we talk about Black history, we have to get rid of the idea that it has to be all doom and gloom, or even that it has to be mostly doom and gloom. And I think the central line for it, for me, is when Ralph Ellison said, can a people spend 300 years of living and breathing only in reacting? That's a paraphrase, but only by reacting is the idea that the most interesting thing about us is what white people did to us. And I think many people would say, oh, yes, yes. And I would say, oh, no, no, especially not now, not in 2025. And so and then it gets into Nicole Hannah Brown. And Nicole
Hannah Jones, you mean?
Nicole Hannah. Who is that? Nicole Hannah Jones. Yes.
I don't know.
And how she points out that that Black people have made America face up to its ideals. True, but I would have to disagree with her in that. Well, no, I'm not going to say I disagree with her, but that makes it sound like that's the main thing about us, that we're these people standing here. You must face up to your ideals and stop hurting us, and that's the main thing. And America starts in 1619. I get a little impatient with that. I think that we have too much to celebrate, and not just George Washington Carver, not these isolated people, but the whole story. He had a soprano voice. I want to get that out there. George Washington Carver talked like this.
No, I didn't know that.
Isn't that interesting? Anyway, but that's not the Black history that we should be telling, but it should be about.
Why is that interesting? I mean, it is curious, but I wonder if there's some deeper meaning.
Well, wouldn't you expect that he would just have a normal male voice? But instead, he sounded like that. There are speculations as to why it may have been that there was apparently some kind of botched operation when he was a kid. But then there's more about him. He was a much more interesting person than...
People should know George Washington Carver was a scientist who was at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama for many, many years and made great discoveries, especially about various applications of the sweet potato.
Peanut.
I mean, I'm not an expert on George Washington Carver, but he was a scientist of some note in the late 19th.
300 uses of the peanut is what the factoid always was. But he lived long enough.
The peanut, not the sweet potato.
Yeah. Okay. And he was recorded. And he sounds like your niece. It's very interesting. But I just thought...
But your main point is it's not all doom and gloom, and we're not just reactive against the oppression and external imposition. We are also expressive of our own interest. And
the things that we have won. For example, the great Black business districts. And we always hear about how Tulsa was viciously burned down. Same thing happened in Wilmington, North Carolina. Those are stories that we must tell. But those stories are told as if that happened every time Black people built up a business district, that white thugs came in and burned it down once there was some rape allegation or something. Actually, usually that didn't happen. And so there were those districts, and they thrived until desegregation. And Black people built these worlds within a world. And it's something that we could do when lynching was ordinary, when segregation was remorseless. We did something right. And we don't hear enough about that sort of thing in Black history. What we hear is that white people hated us and kept us from being the best that we could be. And I remember I was talking to an intelligent, educated Black woman about 25 years ago, and she said, I think we'll always be a sad people. And I thought, I get it, but no, you're falling too much for the idea that the essence of us is what other people did to us and that that's all that we can ever be. Where it's supposed to be that we're walking upward, so to speak. And once we get to the light of the lobby, we're not supposed to still be crying. It's supposed to be here we are. And so I was touched by the museum, and it did make me think this is how it should be told, not just the slave manacles. Because when I was little, that was all you got. You got flashcards of all these remote people, usually who lived too long ago to seem relevant to today, like George Washington Carver. Okay, he did that. That's this one person. But then it was roots, slavery. And I found that hard to connect to. And I didn't want to think, okay, I'm going to join them in their sadness, which is what I think this woman I spoke to maybe was thinking. So I think that the museum is a nice way of showing a different kind of Black history than I think a lot of what settled in starting in the 60s and then extended long after that. What do you think?
Well, I'm thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm wondering whether or not the museum, as a part of the National Museum structure of the United States, the Smithsonian and so forth, is on the wrong side of the line as far as the diversity, equity, and inclusion debate is evolving. And aren't there executive orders from the new administration that are raising questions about how the history of the United States is told, and might not have focused on African American life and culture, run afoul of the new sensibility it's emanating? And how does that jibe with your celebration of the affirmative storytelling, historiography that you see reflected in the curation of this museum and so on? That's what I was thinking.
Well, that museum, it made one mistake. We all make them. And so during 2020, only online, because you couldn't go, but only online, they had this stupid poster up about how, Black people are not, it's not Black to be on time or to get the exact answer or to exhibit initiative, etc. So whiteness is precision. Black people are authentic and kind of take it easy. And it's this poster. And I think people should know that that poster was created by a white woman, to the extent that some people are given to saying that the extremes of wokeness are kind of led by educated white women. This was a good example. For some reason, somebody put that up. I'll bet it was some intern or some new curator or something. And there was an outcry, as there should have been, and it was taken down. They did that once. But if you go to the museum and you're thinking that it's going to be all we hate white people, then you haven't been to the museum. Apparently, Trump visited it in 2017, but honestly, it requires literacy. I mean, there are a lot of tags and things, and I don't assume that he was doing a whole lot of reading. And maybe all he remembered was the slave part, and maybe he didn't want to walk anymore up the ramp. I don't know. But there's nothing in that museum that justifies the idea that it's teaching people the wrong thing. It's teaching people the right thing. And I was looking for it, and I was kind of trying to fake myself out. I was thinking, one, I don't see what the Trump order said. And I know that order is not just him, but his people. Then I thought, because I think about some of the people that I hear from here. Am I trying to say the right thing to a certain kind of person on the left? Am I trying to be cuddly? Am I pretending not to see what the Trumpians saw? I kept on thinking that too. Like, come on, John. How would I see this if I were one of these bow-tied people? It's just not there. It's just not there. It's a happy place, fundamentally. A lot of it is the poster over your head, or the two posters over your head. It's just not that. So I would say that honestly, it was one of the best museums I've ever been to, and I was not expecting that. And frankly, I've been to a lot of museums, and so yeah, I'm glad that I got to write about that, because they did a good job down there.
You think that attacking that museum on the grounds of colorblind, transracial, we don't want to wallow in the negative parts of American history like slavery and Jim Crow would be a travesty or a tragedy or something? I can't remember exactly how you put it.
Well, let's try this. If a person went to that museum 4 times Well, make it three times and really did the whole thing. You can't do the whole thing in one visit, really. But if you did it, you went 3 times and you were asked to take a test, you were asked maybe a dozen questions. I would say that anybody who did that should be absolved of any claim that they don't know about Black history, that they walk around ignorant of Black history. The museum is such that I would imagine you could use it as a way of telling people, no, you don't still have work to do. This museum gives you exactly the work that you need to do. And if you've taken it in, you are informed and we can move on. That's how useful I found it. I thought this is the course that, quote unquote, every American could take. And we could get past the idea that no one knows about slavery. No one wants to talk about lynching. No one wants to talk about Thomas Jefferson owning slaves. Get past that. It's good in that way. I thought this is good education. Yeah. I didn't get that into the piece, but I thought
Is
that
there a political slant? I mean, I can remember complaints that, for example, Justice Clarence Thomas wasn't initially represented much in the museum and whatnot. I wonder how the debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois is depicted. I wonder if a writer like George Schuyler, who was an acerbic social critic from the right, African-American, writing for the Pittsburgh, whatever they called it, Gazette or something, I can't remember. But
yeah.
I mean, I know there must be exhibits about the Black newspapers that circulated back in the day.
Whole thing. Yeah.
But if you go through there, do you have some sense of the kind of political orientation or slant of the people who are putting the museum together? Is Nicole Hannah-Jones's view of the world, as opposed to John McWhorter's view of the world, more evident in the way in which the museum is organized?
Nicole Hannah-Jones's view of the world includes a glower, the frown. And yes, I'm referring to the way she often presents, but I would say it if she were a man as well. And it's in her writing. It's that frown. That is not at the museum. It's a place that actually accentuates the positive when possible. Now, we live in a world, and there's certain expectations that we just have to live with. Is the museum committed more to a little leaning left than right? Is there a general sense in it that the doom and gloom perspective, or then later the Black power perspective, is default and then everything else is other? Sure, it's not going to be any other way. But Booker T. Washington is not made to look like an idiot. Du Bois looks a little more hallowed, but they do not just trash him. I am pretty sure I recall seeing a photo of George Schuyler, and not small, with it saying, blah, blah, conservative. And I remember thinking, okay, at least name check him and don't diss him. And that was fine. Do you come away with a more vibrant picture of Jesse Jackson with an afro, et cetera? Sure. Yeah. I understand that. But it doesn't make it seem like not thinking like that makes you a fool. And I also remember, now I'm having to dig, they do the newspapers so much that I got a little tired. I thought, how much do we need to know about these? Which means they were showing a Black victory. These newspapers, and each thick newspaper is written by very competent people, and there was no just Black paper. There was one or two in every big city. And then there was the role that the Chicago Defender played nationwide in creating the Great Migration. That's good. That's stuff that one wants to know. The museum wears you out, and not just with, oh God, oh shit, oh God. I liked that.
Sounds pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why I wrote that piece. And if it makes more people go, and if it, in general, I'm always thinking of younger people. I want a Coleman Hughes to read that and just think, Black history does not have to be all Amistad, 12 Years a Slave, and Roots. That has to be part of it. But we are not just rebuke. We are not just reacting to other people. We are also us. And us is not just dancing. That's important. And so I think that I hope to have contributed to getting that across. And I find that a great many Black people seem to agree, including educated ones, because they've been writing me about it. And so I think we're dealing with a shifting consensus at this point.
I think it's a brilliant piece. People ought to read it.
Thank you, Glenn.
Now, I'm getting letters from people saying you don't like the DEI because I'm not all that happy about the anti-DEI rampaging. Uh, one of my students here at Brown, his name is Alex Shea, has become famous in this kind of small register famous because he took the initiative of asking all of the DEI administrators at Brown what they did last week in the spirit of Elon Musk. And he used some technical apparatus, and he had an AI bot searching through the register of the employees of Brown University looking for identifying information, and then sent these people an email kind of pretending to be a journalist. I mean, not really. There's a defunct student newspaper, conservative student newspaper here at Brown that he resurrected for the sole purpose of doing the journalistic investigation.
Did anybody answer?
Well, they answered "Go to hell" or "I'm offended by this." I think a few people did actually answer in a more direct way, but I think most people were annoyed or upset by it, and the administration came after him. Although he ultimately prevailed in a disciplinary hearing, but I'm just saying, DEI is on the ropes. DEI bad. Get rid of DEI. The question I have for you is whether or not you and I have any responsibility in our sustained attack on the people with three names and our contempt for the overemphasis on racial identity factors. And you've given voice to it in describing how you think that some in the humanities have overplayed that card. And that shouldn't be the only thing. And I, of course, agree with that. And we're both, I think we're both more or less happy with what the Supreme Court did in 2023 with affirmative action and so on. So, I was at the Manhattan Institute until just recently, and Christopher Rufo is a name that you think of when you think of the DEI and the Manhattan Institute as a critic and an instigator of a reaction against. Undoubtedly important in advising people within the Trump administration on these questions. Do we have blood on our hands, metaphorically speaking, for having abetted this revolution? Is it a revolution? The wheel is turning for sure. Not only are we past peak woke, we're kind of like in a reverse, going full speed in the opposite direction on the campuses and all of that. They're on the defensive. And do we have any responsibility for that?
No. That kind of question implies that we shouldn't have said anything, or that we should have only mumbled in an academic way, which would have had no effect. Something needed to be done because we live in a real world of real people. The backlash was going to be too extreme at first, and maybe could be trimmed, as happens when someone like me writes that long piece, as the courts fight back against the worst of these sorts of things, et cetera. Life is messy. A lot of those people on the left back then were saying that, change is messy, revolution is messy. Yes, some of this is excessive, but this is how it goes. Well, this is how it goes when you're on the other side too. You and I and people like us and white people along with us were fighting for Black dignity. And I defend that. And I fully understand that social history is going to be messy, but our hearts were in the right place and silence would have been inappropriate. And I'm going to say this. I don't know her personally, but for example, Claudine Gay should not have been president of Harvard. She did not have the qualifications that people before her had of any kind. Some people had more of A, some people had more of B. She didn't have that. She was put in that position because she was a woman, and especially because she was Black. A female version of her, called her Pauley Prescott, would not have been put in. She was put there because she was a Black woman with a certain stage presence. That's objectifying. That was wrong. I didn't like seeing that when it happened, with pictures of her with the big smile. I was thinking she hasn't earned that yet. Maybe as she got older, but That wasn't right. That's the sort of thing that we were pushing back against the DEI. Christopher Rufo is not nice, but a lot of what he's doing comes from a place that people like that need to come from. I'm sorry. I really am sorry, but 2020 happened. And also kind of 2018, 2019 happened. Our jobs were to push back against that and to show that it doesn't make you self-hating, doesn't make you a racist to do it, or that if anybody calls us that, they know they don't mean it. So there you go.
Yeah. I think I agree. I mean, certainly if you go back and roll the tape, I was very critical of Harvard in elevating Claudine Gay to that position. I didn't think she had the gravitas and the depth of scholarly achievement. Of course, you could say college administration is not necessarily scholarship, and then
but gravitas in general.
Yeah,
just other stuff. Why her?
But the plagiarism was a deadly, and given the arguability of the question about her gravitas, the plagiarism instance after instance after instance was just more than anybody could bear.
And then her wanting to, her at first not wanting to step down, as if, well, because I'm Black, it's okay. That won't do. That just won't do.
But what about the kid that comes to campus from inner city Detroit or somewhere and is looking for a community and looking for administrative support and needs a kind of shelter, wants, and there's an associate dean. I don't want to name her, a woman who has a position of associate dean for diversity, equity, inclusion here at Brown. And, she and her husband and Luan and I went out to dinner, basically at her invitation. She just kind of rang me up and we had a Zoom meeting, and I could see she was intelligent, devoted person, and the stories that she told about her work kind of moved me. One story, just to give an example, was a kid who was getting ready to not graduate because he was behind in paying his fees. And, she basically said, you could avail yourself of this or that emergency fund and you could get your fees paid. Now, the kid was Black and this woman is Black. And she put her arm around his shoulder and kind of protected him. And I don't know how different that is than, a Jewish kid going to Hillel and working something out. And, I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody here. I'm just saying, the identity of the kid, Black from inner city America, coming to Brown. Brown is a very elite place. Having an office, he can go in and close the door, and somebody he can talk to and whatnot. And that person marshaling resources within the community on the behalf of the kid. And I'm sure that story can be repeated over and over again. What's wrong with that? I mean, that's the kind of thing that's being run out of town on a rail here. That's the kind of thing that gets assimilated to, well, they have a Black orientation, they have a Black graduation, they have a whatever. And you don't need to have a Black orientation or separate people into different lines in the seminar to say you're privileged and you're not privileged. I mean, those are, most extreme cases or something. But attention to the particular needs that emanate from the racial identity kind of counseling and support. I'm not sure I'm against that, even though I'm against racial affirmative action and special different standards and, not having the high expectations and, tunnel vision about all they think about is race and they don't think about learning the German language or higher mathematics or whatever.
No, I completely agree with you, but in anybody who has a problem, you're talking about the woman is usually named Margaret or Brenda. And if it's a guy, he's Ernie. That guy on any college campus, that woman on any college campus in that administrative position, who either officially or unofficially is the place where the Black students can go and close the door. The issue is, though, that there have been Margarets and Ernies since the 90s at least on any college campus worth its name that has a representative number of Black students. I mean, that's the way it used to be. There was nothing wrong with having a Margaret and maybe also a Brenda, and then maybe Ernie over somewhere else, maybe 3 people. That's enough. The issue is you don't have to have a whole bureaucracy of that. There will always be, like within our time, there are Black people, there are Black students who are not really comfortable unless they're with their own people. And it's understandable. That kind of person, they're not going to be as comfortable talking to a white administrator, especially if they grew up not knowing many white people. So yeah, that Black person who can go like that. But we already had that. We had that 30 years ago. They were beginning to have that when I was in college 40 years ago. The question is how much? And when you read about 150 people at UVA who are DEI or DEI adjacent,
Agreed.
and they're taking up money that could bring in 125 extra students, that no, faculty pay for faculty. That's the problem. It's this explosion that we've seen, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Is there any anti-Black animus to be discovered in the subtext of the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is there any presumption that the Black kids who are at a Princeton or a Dartmouth are not qualified, or something like that? They're there because of the special dispensation that is intolerable, and they're there at the expense of other people. Does that rhyme at all with the long history of questioning about the legitimacy and the standing of Black people, or is that too much Michael Eric Dyson for you?
It doesn't have to. I can imagine being a white person who's just tired of being told that it's a sin that they're white and tired of changing standards and being told that that's not what's going on. You can be damn sick of that and married to a Black person. And I don't go for the idea that you can be married to a Black person and still be a racist in any way that deserves the name. You can be sick of that stuff and be quite, unracist. And I have no reason to think that racism is behind most of these efforts that I've seen. Are some of them bigots? Probably. People aren't perfect. But no, this is more than not liking Black people. Somebody who has that view is basically saying, if you don't approve of me never having to submit to really serious competition, if you think Black people actually need to be evaluated in the same way as everybody else, you're a racist. And that, frankly, talk about self-hating. You and me are self-hating. That's self-hating, that underestimation of what Blackness can be in 2025, as opposed to saying this in 1980. So no, it's not necessarily racist. Just because it doesn't make somebody like Eddie Glaude feel good doesn't mean that it's racist. It means that Eddie Glaude just doesn't feel good.
You said something earlier that I hear you, by the way. I want to affirm what you've been saying. I'm playing the devil's advocate a little bit, been asking these questions. But you said something about dignity. You said what we are doing, you and I, in our anti-DEI voices that have been, repeating some of these counter arguments against affirmative action and overemphasis on racial identity for a long time, that we're fighting for the dignity of Black people. And I just want to say in my own voice that that's precisely what I have regarded myself as doing for true equality, for a throwing off the burden of second-class citizenship and subordinate status, and doing so from the premise that the only long-lasting solution to the problem of our inherited second-class status that is coming out of slavery and post-slavery segregation and all that is to man up and woman up, develop the skills, compete on a level playing field in an equal way, and answer the question, you people aren't fit, with the demonstrated performance that shows beyond any question that we are fit. And that this posture of having to appeal to the sympathy, the generosity, the so-called decency, the morality of white people with, for example, the reparations argument. Obviously the history of the U.S. does leave plenty of evidence of Black people being deprived of property and income and opportunity and so forth because of unfairness and discrimination and all that. That history cannot be undone. Should it be compensated? And I'm thinking, well, if that's the argument, if the argument is we sit here awaiting your acknowledgement of our claim, we've just put all the cards on the other side of the table. We've made the white man, as it were, the arbiter of our future as opposed to making our own future. And that kind of very Booker T. Washington, Clarence Thomas kind of rhetoric, but that has been my touchstone. And I'm saying if you depend on the largesse and the beneficence and the generosity and the guilt is Shelby Steele. If you depend on that, you're not empowered. You're made into a client. You're reduced. And if you're implicitly depending on people looking the other way, okay, my test scores is not as great. Maybe I'm not at the head of the class. Maybe I'm not in the science lab as much. Maybe I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, as it were. But I dare you to tell me that I'm not, and the numbers have got to be jiggered so that it looks like I am. Michelle Obama gave this speech recently that really annoyed the hell out of me. Telling Princeton and Black people that the system is rigged. Don't believe the hype. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't feel like you're inferior if your test score is lower. I didn't test well when whatever. And there's no substitute for getting an A in physics. Not everybody's interested in physics. I understand that. There's no substitute for reading War and Peace. Or whatever the thing is, there's no substitute for getting into that Schopenhauer philosophy thing or into that symphony that John wants you to not have, overlooked because you were in the racial ghetto. There's no substitute for measuring up. That's a challenge. It's not going to happen in a day, but it'll never happen if you don't face up to it. And if you let people pat you on the head and cover for you, you're not equal. You can't really stand up and look them in the eye, knowing that you haven't actually mastered whatever the game is that you're supposed to be playing. So I just want to go on the record saying that, I'm not apologizing for saying that. I think that's the imperative of our time, and I think we're short on time as the blowback. I think people overplayed their hands, and I don't think anybody is coming to save us. So I think it might as well be now. Might as well be now that we get that cold bucket of water in the face. They don't give a damn, or they do, but they're not prepared to patronize us, and we got to man up and woman up.
I agree.
All right, John.
Yeah. I have to, as they say, bounce. And so I think we may have reached the end of our session today.
Yeah, we've reached it. We are at the 1 hour mark. I think we can call it a day for now. We can hook up with maybe we're going to talk with Mark Dunkelman about his book the next time in early June.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for your time, and congratulations on your honorary degree at Colgate University and on that magnificent piece in the Sunday magazine.
Many, many thanks, Glenn. Talk to you very soon.